A man took a selfie with his dog during a tranquil walk in the forest, but the peaceful outing quickly spiraled into an unexpected thrill ride. The day began like any other, sunny and picturesque, prompting the duo to pause for a photo. However, when the dog's owner reviewed the selfie, his face drained of color, prompting him to flee in terror. The forest Henry chose for his afternoon walk was new to him. He heard good things about it from friends. They said it was quiet and peaceful, the perfect environment for a stroll. Henry admitted that this sounded good, so he drove over there, but pretty soon he wished he never heard of the place. The forest hike started just as he had hoped. As far as he could tell, no one was in the forest. Henry could let his dog, Luke, run freely while taking in the beautiful surroundings, and after an hour of walking, it was time for their tradition. It was time for a picture. So when they got to a new place they liked, Henry would always take a selfie with Luke. It was a way to document good spots to revisit in the future, but soon this place would scare the living daylight out of him. They posed together and snapped the photo, but then the selfie was meant to be sent toward the home front. Henry's wife was busy, but always liked it when her husband kept her up to date on his adventures. But this image never made it back home, because when he looked at the picture, he turned pale, feeling shivers all over his body. Henry knew he had to turn around to see if what he saw in the picture also had manifested in real life, but he was scared to look. He kept staring at the screen on his phone in disbelief. And when Luke started barking in that direction, the tension just became too much. He knew he couldn't live in Nile for much longer, even though he wanted to keep staring at his phone and deny what lurked behind him. After a few short breaths, he mustered enough courage to turn around, but to his surprise, there was nothing there. Luke, on the other hand, saw something Henry didn't. Luke's gaze was still fixed in the same direction, and ever since the picture was taken, he had not stopped barking. Henry flipped over his phone and again, to compare the image with a real-life background, it has disappeared. He whispered in horror. That meant it was on the move, which only made their situation more dire. "We have to get out of here," Henry shouted to his dog. He didn't want to stay in that hard place any longer and wait for that thing in the trees to return. So, without hesitation, he leashed Luke and got out of there quickly. Both owner and dog carefully walked in the opposite direction, but the tension did not diminish when they did. And that fact was all Luke's, because with each step they took away from the image source, Luke kept looking backward. Henry's dog became more and more frantic, and after a while, he even started growling at something behind them. Henry's steps quickened after that. He wanted to get out of this forest before this thing caught up with them. But then they were stopped in their tracks all of a sudden, because right in front of them was a huge footprint. It had rained the night before, causing the mark to be preserved perfectly. The sight of this giant imprint scared the living daylight out of Henry, and it made him want to find safety even more. They were now in full sprint trying to get to the comfort of Henry's hatchback as fast as possible. Luke was still barking, and now Henry could hear heavy footprints behind them. After about 10 minutes of exhausting and adrenaline-filled running, Henry saw his car in the distance. A sense of relief washed over him, thinking they would be safe now. But then something happened that he did not expect. Luke suddenly pulled hard on his leash in the opposite direction, and by doing so, he broke free. Henry noticed it instantly, but was powerless to stop his stubborn dog. He whispered friendly toward Luke and begged him to come back to him, but the brown Labrador ignored this request and bolted the other way. Luke quickly disappeared out of sight, but Henry could hear him bark the entire way. They were so close, but Henry had no choice. He couldn't leave his dog behind. He knew he had to return and find Luke before it was too late. Why would he go toward the sound of those footsteps? Henry wondered. Reluctantly, Henry paced back into the forest, going through the dense foliage. It wasn't hard to track down Luke. The growling and barking could probably be heard for miles. Henry thought, but why was his dog barking? Acting this frantic, and why was he putting himself in harm's way after pushing away some foliage that blocked his sight? Henry saw his dog standing still in the distance. This had parked in front of a large row of dense bushes and was now repeatedly barking at the greenery. Why is he doing this? Henry spoke out loud slowly and carefully. Henry approached. His erratic dog and asked what was going on. "What do you see? Why are you barking?" The answer to that question would come sooner than Henry expected, because almost immediately after he asked it, the already nervous Henry got the fright of his life. What he saw there in the bushes made Henry take a few large steps backwards, moving away from the scene ever so slightly. And for good reason, because out of the bushes stepped a giant bear. The creature was massive and started growling loudly the moment Henry laid eyes on him. With every step Henry took backward, the bear did the same in his direction, waving his paws while he did. Henry wanted to scream, but he didn't seem bothered by the bear's presence. He just stood still and stared at the giant beast. Why wasn't he afraid? Why did he run toward danger in the first place? It would turn out that Luke had a very good reason for all of this, and it would soon come to light. Henry couldn't believe what he was seeing, but didn't have much time to admire his dog's bravery. He tried to lure his dog away from the bear with a subdued voice, but Luke didn't care at all. In fact, the stubborn dog even started to inch closer to the dangerous animal after that. At that point, Luke was almost on top of the bear's foot, while Henry managed to distance himself from the danger. This is just too bizarre. Maybe this bear was friendly and his dog felt that, Henry thought to himself. But then the bear rose and lifted his massive body on his hind legs. It almost seemed like the bear had grown twice in size, and the menacing appearance of the creature frightened Henry. He thought this was the end, that this bear was ready to attack his dog and him when he's done with Luke. But then the creature's demeanor changed. It sat back down and started moaning. After that weird turn of events, Luke added to the encore of sounds with his moaning noises. It sounded sad, which caught Henry off guard. Without realizing it, Henry took a step closer. Luke had started licking the bear in a friendly manner, and both now stared at Henry with watery eyes. "Are they trying to tell me something?" Henry spoke out loud. He took another step in their direction when he saw that, the bear and Luke had started walking away. And they weren't just heading off, they kept looking backward at Henry, like they wanted him to follow along. And so Henry did, and after about a 15-minute walk, Henry saw where they were going. During the hike, the furry duo kept establishing contact with Henry. They were looking at the confused man to know if he still followed along, barking and growling if he didn't hurry up. But then a cabin appeared. It was rustic, and it had definitely seen better days, but it was clear that this was their destination because the bear and Luke walked through the doorway without hesitation. Henry stood still momentarily, thinking about the weird situation he had gotten into, but when both animals started growling inside, Henry also followed. Once inside the cabin, Henry observed the minimal interior, and it was not minimal as in a Scandinavian design way. This barn is almost completely vacant. Only a broken chair in the corner and a doorway without its hinges remained. It was clear that nobody had been in here for years, but Henry did see something else. But before he saw it, he first smelled it. The foul aroma of rotting fish entered his nose when he stepped into the cabin, and after a brief scan of the room, he could see the half-eaten fish head sticking up between some nesting material. Was this the bear's den? When Henry stepped into the cabin, Luke and the bear were nowhere to be seen. This cabin wasn't large, so they had to be somewhere around here. The confused dog owner called out for his pet, and a loud bark was heard from the other side of the doorway. Henry knew where he needed to go, but did not know what he would find when he arrived. He knew that Luke and the bear were gone. We were behind the doorframe, but still had no idea why, let alone why they wanted him to come along so badly. But he was about to find out because when he stepped into the other room, he saw both animals sitting in the center of the room. Their backs were facing Henry, and they appeared to be staring downward. Henry could also detect some soft moaning once more. But why? The confused man stepped closer to see what they were looking at. Henry was still scared of the bear, so he was careful with his approach. But after a few shaky steps, he placed his body next to the furry giant. He couldn't believe that he'd just done that, but he wasn't allowed to let his mind wander because he heard a loud screech the moment he got there. His shiver ran down his spine as the sound entered his ear canal. The bear reacted as well and made an almost crying sound. It felt like the animal was in pain, and when Henry looked downward, he could see why. In the center of the room was a large hole with a deep pit below. The hole was at least 12 feet deep and light. Hardly reached the bottom. When Henry squinted his eyes, he saw the problem in this scenario. At that moment, he knew exactly why this bear wanted him to follow along so badly. It was heartbreaking, and he knew he had to do something. 3 tiny bear cubs were at the bottom of this deep and steep pit. They were stuck and were screaming for their mother sitting at the top. The large bear's paws weren't long enough to reach them, so the poor mother was powerless to do anything. It was clear they couldn't climb out themselves, so Henry instantly figured out what had happened. He already concluded that this was the bear's den because of the fish and nesting material, but this hole was created floorboard edges. They must have been playing or wandering around their den when the floor collapsed, making them fall. Henry did not hesitate. He wanted to help, but knew he could not do this by himself. That's why he immediately picked up his phone, called emergency services. A rescue team operator answered the call and Henry explained the dire situation at hand, asking them to come over quickly. The rescue team operator told Henry they would arrive soon and suggested the worried man to sit tight. Henry agreed and hung up the phone, but when he returned to the pit, he knew waiting was no option. He could see that at least 2 of the cubs were injured. He had to act now. Dirt and filthy water were down there, making the bruises and cuts highly susceptible to infections. Henry had to step in now and worry about the rest later. He hoped that the cubs would remain calm while he climbed down because if they moved around too much, they could injure themselves further. Henry scanned the room, hoping to find something to help him descend safely, and that's when a brilliant idea came to him. He could use Luke's dog leash to climb down. The leash was at least 20 feet long, if the collar's packaging was accurate, so Henry tied it around a pole and started his descent. Luckily for Henry and the bears involved, the marketing on the leash packaging wasn't a lie. The line was more than long enough and got him down to the bottom of the pit safely, and to Henry's surprise, the cubs didn't seem scared at all when the strange human reached them. About 30 minutes after Henry started his descent, the rescue team arrived. They spotted the old cabin and approached the building with climbing gear in hand. They expected to be greeted by a desperate man and a pit full of scared bear cubs, but what they got was something totally different. The team stepped into the cabin and called out for Henry. At first, there was no answer, but everything became apparent when the squad members entered the adjacent room. Their initial reaction was fear and an instinct to run because they saw the colossal mother bear the moment they stepped in. But the tension faded when Henry's voice was heard from behind the creature. Henry said everything was fine and they weren't in danger. "Come in, come closer. Some little ones over here need your assistance," the now calm Henry proclaimed. Even the animal rescue team was in awe about what they saw next. The large bear sat relaxed on her bottom while Henry and his dog patted her baby cubs. Usually these woodland bears were very protective of their children, especially when they were injured. But this mother seemed completely calm. "I already saved them, but they need medical attention," Henry said, smiling. Henry pointed out the wounds that occurred on the bear cub's legs and arms. They were shallow, but still needed some looking after. "Maybe a couple stitches here and there and some antibiotics," Henry said casually. The rescue team nodded in silence as jazz. Eventually, all bears were taken to a wildlife facility in the area. Even the mother bear could come along and watch her young children recover in a safe environment. It was heartwarming to watch as the bears slowly started playing again after being in such a scary situation for so long. And that was all thanks to Henry and his dog Luke, who conquered their fears to help an animal in need. And they got rewarded in their own way for that. 2 months later, they were in those same woods again when they heard a loud noise in the distance. It was a sound that didn't emanate into fear with the brave dog owner anymore. He and his dog looked east and saw the mother bear, with her 3 recovered cubs, standing on a hilltop. They had all recovered and had grown significantly. They growled happily, and Henry saluted them. I'm really keen to know your thoughts on this story, so please don't hesitate to share your insights in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it engaging, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more similar content. Feel free to share this video with your friends and family to spread the enjoyment. Take good care of yourselves, and I'm excited to connect with you in our future videos.